Yeah. One of our core values around here is punctuality. And I just want Marie, Amy, all of us nailed it today. We're doing great. But yeah, glad you're here. Glad you made it today. And thank you, Amy. Again, a lot of fun stuff in there. Notice how she tried to leave out the marriage part at the end. And I'm not saying, I don't know what it says about John or whatever, what's going on there, but she just was like, we're done with that. We'll get to that later. Yeah, this morning, as we begin, so Genesis 2, last week I got a little carried away, but there's so much, and we're not going to get to everything in Genesis 2 today. But Genesis 1 last week, we tried to kind of set this foundation of what was going on. This week we're going to build on that, because if you don't know, these chapters are actually significantly different. They are telling the same story, but through two very different accounts. This last week, my family, we went on a little getaway. We were in Tennessee for something we've done the last couple summers, just getting away, just going to a lake, spending some time there. One of the things we do while we're there is we like to go whitewater rafting. And by we, I mean some of us. If you don't know my wife's not the most adventurous. She doesn't love risk-taking. She loves anything that is warm and cozy. She's not big on the let's go try new things that we might get injured in. That's not really her thing. But we went out whitewater rafting, and last year we went, actually there was a washout, there was a flood, and we went during a flash flood, literally. This year there was no flash flood, but we took a little bit harder route. Now this is my family in the boat. My brother is with us, and his wife, Kyle and Christy are their names. They're in the boat. My brother's a lot bigger than me. He makes me look like a runt. And at one point, this is us on a last rapid. We're about to hit the last rapid. And every single one of us in the boat is thinking a different thing. Every picture came out about the same. Oliver is generally pretty happy. He's having the time of his life. He will later fall out of the boat, just so you know. But he's having the time of his life. Even when he fell out of the boat, he was having the time of his life. He was doing just fine. Jane is mostly looking up and away. Why? Because we saw an eagle just earlier, and she had seen this bald eagle, and she was now looking for all the other birds. While we were on this trip, I pulled out some cards to do conversation starters with the kids. One of the questions I asked them is, what's one of your favorite trips we've ever taken? They said, last year we went to New York. They said, we loved going to New York. Jane's only thing, this is what I asked her. I said, what was your favorite part of New York? She goes, there were a lot of pigeons. We paid that much money for you to go see a lot of pigeons. That felt good. You remember anything else about the trip? Nothing else. So she's seen eagles, so she was now looking up almost the entire rest of the time. Now, my brother, he's having a good time. His wife, who will also fall out of the boat later, I had to rescue her. She went down into the water right before we almost hit a rock, and so I had to pull her into the boat. Everybody was fine, Marie, but she did fall out of the boat. She had a great time, though. She enjoyed falling out of the boat just fine. And I'm having a good time. I'm kind of looking around at everybody else, and if you notice, Marie, in every single picture, though, she is leaning towards the middle of the boat, trying to get away from the edge the entire time. Now, here's the thing. Here's why I tell you this. It's not just because I want to show you my family vacation photos, although I will. I know that's why you came today, was for me to do a slideshow of these. But I want you to see, here's what's happening. We are all telling the same story. You could ask me, you could ask Jane, you could ask Oliver, you could ask Marie about the same adventure we had, the same thing that had happened, the same story that we're all telling. I promise you every one of us would tell that story in a different way, right? We're going to tell it through the lens that we understood it through. So Oliver is going to tell you about how great it was to fall in the water and get back out of the water. Jane's going to tell you about all the birds she saw, not so much about anything that's in the water, but more about the things that are above the water. Marie's going to tell you that we nearly died. We're all going to have a different account. I'm going to tell you the truth, and that's my part, right? Is to tell you how it actually went, But we all have our different accounts. That's what's going on here in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, because I just want to put this out. You're going to have to reckon with these two accounts. Genesis 1 and 2 are not necessarily the same account. Now, they're telling the same story, but they are very different accounts. If you look at chapters 1 and 2, I just want you to see, and today what we're going to talk about is the other beginning. Not in the beginning, but in the other beginning, which is Genesis 2. In Genesis 1, remember, in Genesis 1, and this might be a little small, but again, there was this format that said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's where it started. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it goes through 6 days of creation, a 7th day of rest, and at that 7th day, this ending says, and so the heavens and earth were finished. It's a done deal. Everything's over. There's nothing else to talk about. That's the end of it. Remember, this is the structure we set up last week. That's how Genesis 1 goes. But notice in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, it says this. It all starts over again. Notice this. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Hold on, I thought we did that. I thought we were done with that part. Why is this the account in Genesis 2, chapter 2, verse 4? Why is it saying this is the account if that was the account? Now, again, I want you to see these are different accounts of the same story, but you do have to wrestle with this just a little bit, because I want you to see that actually if you were to pay attention to if you ever do this, it's a fun little exercise, but take chapter 1, and if you put together, there's a little formula you can put together of how does it go? What is the order it goes? And I'm sorry, this is very small, I understand. I'll send this out tomorrow. If you don't get Restoration Reflections, please do. Please make sure we have your email, because this will all go out tomorrow. But you see in Genesis 1, there's this order, right? It goes light, then it goes sky and waters, land, sea, plants, sun, moon, stars, sea creatures, and birds. And then it goes land animals and humanity, and then there's a rest, 7 days. That's the order it goes in. Genesis 2 actually has a very different order of events. It doesn't move in the same order. In fact, at the beginning of Genesis 2, it actually starts off with a barren, unwatered land, but then the first thing that's formed is not the land and the sky and the waters. The first thing that's formed is actually man with those waters and the mud or the clay, and we'll get to that in a second. Man is actually the first thing formed. Then the garden is formed with its trees. Then the rivers. Then man is placed in it to work those lands. We'll get to that in a second. He's going to work it and keep it. And then animals, birds are named, and then there's a woman created from his side. It's a very different account of what happens here. Now, I want you to realize that this is because this story, remember that this story is not trying to give you logistics. This story is not trying to give you facts. That's not the goal of this. It is a poem that is not about the logistics of this. It's about life. It's not about the logistics of how the world is made. It's about how life is meant to be lived. What is the meaning of this whole thing? What is the meaning of life, not the logistics of how it was made? This isn't here for facts, and these stories are not even necessarily supposed to be chronological. As you can tell, they don't match up. This is not a chronological order. That's not the goal here. But they are complementary in order. They share the same story from different accounts, different ways of looking at the same story, different ways of understanding the same account that you might have, the same stories that you might be told. That's what's happening here. Remember, this is not about facts. That's not the goal here. The goal is for us to understand truth. And sometimes facts and truth are not the same thing. I'm not saying they're totally different, but this isn't about facts. It's about truth, understanding the truth that happens here. So when we see this in chapter 2, verse 4, God's going to create the heavens and the earth all over again. And for us to understand that, I think there's two things that we need to understand in these two chapters. Chapter 1 is very much about our relationship with God. And chapter 2 is the same story told through a different lens of our relationship with creation. Okay? You following me so far? I'm sorry. I know this is going to be like a lecture a little bit here, but hopefully you're following me. The first chapter is about our relationship with God, how he sets up our relationship with him. The second chapter will move us to our relationship with creation. But to understand that, I think we have to kind of go backwards just a little bit. Because remember, we go back and we look at chapter 1. There was these 6 days that were put in place. Remember that there was an earth that was formless and it was empty. And so God does two things. He forms it and he fills it. Remember these 6 days that he goes through. And at the crescendo of these things, the end of these, the biggest thing that happens is in day 6, we get to the image of God itself. God creates mankind. That's where chapter 1 crescendos. And we need to go back to just understand that a little bit so we can understand how to move forward. Because that's how chapter 1 ends. Now remember, in chapter 1, we ended with this last bit where it says in verse 1, or chapter 1, verse 27, it says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." So God creates mankind. This is the crescendo of all of chapter 1, our relationship with God. This is how we understand ourselves. This is where we get our identity from, is from this verse right here. Now the word image here, and you've heard this before if you've been around here, is this word Salem. Salem is the word in Hebrew that means image or likeness. It's supposed to mean that we look exactly like. It is almost a reflection of the one who created us. So God created us in his own image. Now, sometimes this goes well. Sometimes we have a pretty clear image of what we look like in this, and sometimes it gets a little distorted. We were, again, in Sevierville, Tennessee, which is the hometown of Dolly Parton. If you don't know Dolly, she's pretty famous. She wrote some songs. And there's one lady out there somewhere named Jolene who I think we all hate pretty well because of her, you know. And we were walking through Sevierville, and there was a statue of Dolly. This is the statue of Dolly Parton in her hometown. Now, it looks a lot like Dolly. It's pretty good. It has a pretty good image of what we expect it to look like, right? And this is Dolly Parton's statue. Now, there's other statues, there's other images that are supposed to be a reflection of somebody that did not go as well. For instance, like there's this one that was Ronaldo, the soccer player, Cristiano Ronaldo. The statue of him that was unveiled at an airport recently looked like that. And apparently he was disappointed. And I don't know why. I think they got it pretty good. They nailed it, right? They tried so hard. Or if you've ever been to upstate New York, you've seen Lucille Ball's statue. Yeah, I know. Somebody did not love Lucy when they made this one, I'll tell you that. They did not love Lucy. They did that to her. I know, right? Yeah, yeah. That one comes to life at night. I promise you that. Yeah, that one's murdered a couple people. Yeah. Yeah, or if you've been in Liverpool, there's one of John Lennon where he apparently, they put him together with that big head on Easter Island. You know what I'm talking about? Like they combined him, and this is what he looked like. So I'm not saying the image is always what we expect it to look like. The goal of this is for us to see past what these images, we think that there are images something's supposed to look like. We think when we see an image, and it says that there's this image that we're creating, that's going to be this perfect image of God. I will say, I think a lot of times the images that we think we're supposed to see look different than what we expected. They're going to look different than we expected. This is why when God creates mankind, he creates mankind in his image. Again, C.S. Lewis says it this way, where he talks about the image of God. He says, there are no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal. That's not how we work. We are all immortal because we're created in the image of God. It's immortals with whom we joke, with whom we work, with whom we marry, snub, exploit, immortal horrors, or everlasting splendors. That's what you're dealing with when you deal with other people. When you see others, you are not looking at flesh and blood. You are looking at an immortal soul across the board. And that does not have decisions made for it. Here's what I think we do, is we think that immortal souls are mostly us. The most important people are those that have these souls that have been created in the image of God. Generally, if I was to ask you, what does the image of God look like? I promise you, you would design something that looks a lot like you. What does the image of God look like? Well, he probably looks a lot like I do. What does the image of God look like? He probably likes the things I like. He probably thinks the way I think. He's probably for the things I'm for and against the things I'm against. Instead of that being the other way around. See, God's image is not based on what you look like. You are based on what he looks like. And the other images of God out there are not based on what you like or what you're for. They are based on what he is for. And guess who he's for? Everyone. Which is really, really frustrating sometimes, isn't it? Because I think you and I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, we want God to be on our side. We want God to see things the way we see them. We want him to do the things we want him to do. And we don't want him being for other people who are not like us. We want him to act the way he should act for us. But it turns out that his image is not relegated. It is not small enough to be fit in just you or in just me. Or just in people that look or think or act like us. His image is so big that it is in every single person. Every person you look at, there are no mere mortals. Everyone that you look at, everyone you come in contact with, that coworker you can't stand, that person that you disagree with every single day, the sibling that you don't get along with, the friends that you've not talked to in years now because you can't get along with them, guess what? They are also image bearers of the same God. The country you disagree with, the nationalities you don't like, the people who are poorer than you or richer than you, guess whose image they were created in? The same God as you. The image of God is in each person. It is immortals that we are dealing with here, every single one of us. This is why in Exodus 20, God says that you shall not, remember in the Ten Commandments, he says, you shall not make for yourself an image a Salem of anything in heaven or on earth or in the waters below. This is creation language, right? There's heavens and earth and waters. Don't create any images for yourself. Why wouldn't God want us to do that? Wouldn't you think that, because that includes God in that, right? God doesn't want us to do that. Why? Because you already are the image of God. He does not need another one. God has already created an image of himself. He does not need idols that stand up. He does not need statues of himself. It's not that God is like somehow photo shy and he's like, please just don't take a picture. I get a little nervous. Please get my good side if you're going to do that. Why do we have no paintings or very few renderings of what God looks like? Why do we have no visuals of what God looks like? Why? Because he looks like you, and he looks like the people around you, and he looks like the people you hate just as much. That's what God's image is. He says, I don't want you to make images because you've already made one. You are the image. You collectively are the image of God. This is why he says, don't do that. But and also he says in those 10 commandments right after that, he says that you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Why? Because that's what you're carrying. You already have an image of God. He doesn't want a pedestal of his image on something with his name below it. He wants you to be the one who carries his name. You are the image of God. Every single one of us. But we want to select that. We want to choose that. We want ones that are like us. Martin Luther King Jr. in one of his sermons, he once said it this way. He said, the image of God is universally shared, I love this, in equal portions by all men. I love this line. There is no graded scale of essential worth. Every human being has etched in his personality the indelible stamp of the Creator. There's no scale, graded scale of essential worth, but that's not true in our culture, is it? Because let's not kid ourselves. There are people that we like more than others. There are people that we think are more like God than others. And again, generally it's people that we think look like us or act like us or think like us. Some of us are pretty convinced that it's the people we voted for that are more like the image of God than the people we didn't. Some of us are pretty convinced it's the people with skin colors like ourselves than those that don't have that. Some of us are pretty convinced it's people who have come from the same nationality or background than those of us who didn't. Some of us are pretty convinced it's the same classification of tax bracket than those of us who aren't part of that. That's where the image of God resides. No, it turns out that there's no graded scale. The image of God is everyone. You've never met a mere mortal. And so when God sets this up, this is foundational for us to understand, because God is now going to take that relationship that we have with him, this internal worth that he has given us, both internal and eternal worth that he has put in every human, and he's going to apply it to all of creation. This is going to play out in all of our relationships, all of creation. This isn't just our relationship with God. Now we see all of our relationship with creation start to play out too, based on this. Back in chapter 2, verses 5 and 6, you start to see how this starts to come together. Here's what it says in verse 5. It said, now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth. No plant had yet sprung up. For the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth. There was no one there to work the ground. But streams, this is very interesting, it's very different. Streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. And as that happened, there was water now. There's this water that kind of collides with the mud or the clay. I like to think it was probably like a clay. But as those things start to collide, then suddenly the Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and that man became a living being. Just a couple quick notes on this, by the way. So again, this water comes up. God forms these two things together, very much like what Jesus does in John chapter 9. Remember, there's spit and clay. He makes spit and clay, and he puts it in a guy's eyes who was blind, and he makes him see. Remember? Same formula here is what's happening in Genesis 2. But then also notice that it says he breathes into them this breath of life. This is the word ruah in the Hebrew, which means spirit. It's the same exact word. The first line of the Bible where it says the spirit was hovering over the deep, that's the word ruah. It's a spirit. But also there is a spirit that's breathed into you. There is a spirit that is the breath of life. that keeps you living and keeps you alive. There is a spirit within you. That's what this word means. But as this happens, this breath of life comes, and suddenly this man is a living being. Now, when God does this, when it says that he formed him, notice in the beginning of that passage, the Lord God formed a man. That word, we don't have an exact equivalent for that in English. It's a Hebrew word, yatsar, and yatsar is the word for in Hebrew. We don't have a perfect equivalent because it's a verb. It's forming. The best we have actually is the noun form of it, which is the word potter. God is acting like a potter here, bringing these disparate parts together, and he's literally forming the man. It's the same exact word we see in Isaiah chapter 68, or 64, when Isaiah goes and he says, "Yet you, Lord, are our Father. We are the clay. You are the yatsar. You're the potter. We are the work of your hand." This is the word yatsar. It means that he's putting something together that was once split apart. He's putting it together, creating something new. And God's creating over and over again. His work of creation shows us who he is. In fact, one scholar in the 16th century, his name was his name was Sir Francis Bacon, which is that's a great name. You know, like if you're going to be a Sir and have the last name Bacon, you're winning. Sir Bacon is great. And honestly, a restaurant I would go to. Sir Bacon. You know, I would go there. If you opened one, I'd be there. But he said this. He wrote this once in the 16th century during the Enlightenment, that whole period. I love what he says here. He says, God has, in fact, written 2 books, not just one. Of course, we are all familiar with the first one he wrote, namely Scripture. But he's written a second book. It's called Creation. Like, you see God's pattern of what he's doing, how he works. You don't just see it through the book and through the words. You see it through creation itself. Creation tells us a lot about him. The problem is we're not often looking for what he's doing. There are patterns he set up, but we miss them. This last week, again, we were going through the Smoky Mountain National Park, and we've been trying to hit a lot of different national parks. And we went through Smoky Mountain National Park, and there was this sign that somebody had made, and I looked it up because it made me laugh. This is a 1-star review of national parks. Have you ever read these? People put, literally, on like Google or on Yelp, people will give 1-star reviews to national parks. And an artist took them, and I found this artist who did this. An artist took their 1-star review and made artwork out of it. So somebody gave a 1-star review to Smoky Mountain National Park. They said that the problem was there's nothing specific to do. There were no guided activities, or I don't know what they were looking for exactly. But like that was their 1-star review. I love this. I think this is fascinating for people to review national parks and say this. For instance, here's another one, just so you know. This artist is great. They also said, this was the Tetons. This is the Grand Teton National Park. All I saw was a lake, mountains, and some trees. What a letdown. What are we even doing here? This one gets a little graphic. I'm sorry for what it says. But this is the Grand Canyon. It's a hole. It's a very, very large hole. That's what somebody wrote about the Grand Canyon. What a letdown this thing is. Just a big hole. Yeah, again, sorry it got graphic. I'm sorry that you had to see that. This one was one of my favorites. Isle Royale. It said no cell service and terrible Wi-Fi. Which, again, real bad. This one was Yosemite. And again, this is why we're looking for the wrong things when we see creation. It says the trees block the view and there are too many gray rocks. That's Yosemite National Park. Just too many gray rocks. Can we do something about that? Anybody want to come paint these or something? Yeah, it's one of my favorites. The trees are blocking the view. Can we cut down those trees so I can see more nature? You know, I love that idea. There are some that have a lot about parking lots. Like we should really clear out this national park so we can have more places to park to go see the nature. I love that idea. I think it's great. There's a whole song written about that, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, about paving paradise and putting up a parking lot. Yeah, and then the County Crows redid it, right? Remember? And it was great. And then they brought in Vanessa Carlton to sing on it. And she just went, bop, bop, bop. Do you guys remember this song? Yeah. And she got paid money to do that. And I think I could have done it. But this is what in nature, we're looking at the trees. We're not seeing what's happening here. What happens is we get sucked in by the nature or the creation itself instead of seeing the creator behind that. We see the trees. We're not looking at what's actually going on here. God is setting up a pattern that nature will teach us, The nature, his handiwork is in this. I'm not trying to say that we need to all go out of here and start walking around barefoot and start hugging every tree we see or whatever. I'm just saying that there is a pattern in nature that God has put there, and that is something we cannot try to neglect. There's a reason he put his fingerprints in this creation. If you read these first 2 chapters of Genesis, you can't miss that God is intentional about what he's creating, and he reveals himself through it. I mean, if you want to get really technical about it, look at what Paul writes. I mean, Paul writes in chapter 1 of Romans, he says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." Like Paul's actually calling us out. If you're not understanding who God is, if you don't see these patterns in nature, that's your fault, not his. You're not looking for what he's doing because he's setting up a very specific pattern here. And what he's doing here that I love, and I think this is important for us to understand, is remember in the first chapter, everything was about separation. Do you remember? He separated light and dark. He separated land and water. Right? He separates these different things. He even does shrubs different than trees, which I don't know the difference totally still. He does things with birds and fish. They are separate entities. He separates all these different things. But notice what he does here. He combines things for the first time. He takes clay and water and he puts them together. He makes something new out of 2 disparate parts. 2 things that don't go together, he makes go together. And through the breath of life, it holds them together. He is the one that holds those things together. As Colossians would say, in him, he holds all things together. Now, that's different. That's something special because I don't know about you, but when I think about it, that's where maybe some of the most beautiful things happen. When these things that shouldn't go together are suddenly together in the same place. Again, I know you're here for my slideshow, so I'm just going to keep going. But this week, as I was sitting on the lake, we were sitting on Lake Douglas, which is northern Tennessee, and we're sitting there on this porch, and this is the view out of the porch from where we're sitting onto the lake. And as I was sitting there, I took a picture of this because I thought it's beautiful watching this. Notice there's a lake. Then behind it there is, well, first of all, there's a house that's in this picture that is worth, I don't know, more than all of us together. It was beautiful. And then behind it was were these foothills, right? You start to see the shoreline that goes into foothills, and then behind that are the Smoky Mountains. And you see mountains. Those things are connecting. It's where those things meet that something beautiful is happening. Like, I don't know about you, but have you ever been to places like this? Like when I've walked around, I remember for years we lived in Washington State, in Bellingham, Washington. And Mount Baker was a mountain that right there, we lived on the Pacific, and right on the Pacific there was a bay, and right next to it were foothills starting to just come up, and then the mountains were right behind it. Mount Baker is what that mountain's called, just right there. Where those things connected, where the sea and the land connected, where the mountains met the water, is where this beautiful thing happened. Right? Have you ever been, I've stood on the edge of the Cliffs of Moher. And on the edge of the Cliffs of Moher, you're standing there in Ireland and you're just looking straight down these cliffs. Why is it so beautiful? Because it's like land just meeting water. These 2 things just meeting in this perfect space. Even a couple years ago, I'm walking through Dunedin. I took this picture in Dunedin. Notice how the sky is just meeting the sea. You almost can't tell where one ends and the other begins. The reflection is perfect. Those are some of those beautiful moments you've ever seen, aren't they? Am I the only one? Where these things meet is somehow something so beautiful, where these 2 disparate parts come together, where they meet. There's something about that God's doing in nature. He does it over and over and over again for us. And to me, it amazes me, at least. I don't know about you, but I think it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. When I watch these things, here's what happens, though. This isn't just about nature. It's not just about how it works in creation. This is about how we relate to each other. See, what they're setting up here is a story of creation and how it relates to each other with these 2 disparate parts being put together. But then how we're supposed to take that and actually not be about trees or mountains or seas, but about humanity. See, follow along for just a second, but remember back in Genesis chapter 1, it said in that first account, the first version of the story you heard, God says to them, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky. That's going to be very important for us as we go through Genesis, is to understand that this is the Genesis mandate. And over every living creature that moves along the ground, God brings Adam into this. He says, you're going to be part of this. You have work to do here, right? In Genesis 2, the author says it just a little bit differently. The Lord took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And I'm sure work it means what you think it means too. He had to dance. He's got to work it. But as he works, he has two jobs here, two important jobs. I want you to see what's going to happen here. He has to work it and take care of it. Work it and take care of it. Now, in that chat, and when he says this in verse 15, the way he says it is important for us to understand, because what he says is these two words, abad, which is to cultivate or to work, right? So it actually is to do the work. But then there's the second part where he says to keep or to reserve it, samar. These two words work in tandem. And what we would think, I think that first word, abad, we like that word because it's to cultivate. It's to do the work. We like that part. We want to do the work. We think that's important for us to do. And that word does show up over 289 times. I think it's 289 times in the Old Testament. This word work. And sometimes it's sacred. It shows up in the priests, what the priests are supposed to do for the temple. It shows up in different ways. It also it comes up in the secular, how to work the farmland, how to work the things of the ground. This is a normal word. 289 times it shows up. We like that part. We like doing the hard work. We want to keep working on things. But this word rest, or this word to keep, feels like it's passive. Like, well, we don't do that as much. Like, that's not for us. Although the word keep actually shows up more times in the Old Testament than the word work. It shows up over 500 times in the Old Testament to just keep things, to just maintain what it is, not to force something new, but to just keep as it is. And I think for us that's really hard because there's a balancing act there. There's a balancing act for each one of us, because think about it for a second, but this is something we're going to struggle with our entire lives, is the balance to cultivate or work and the balance to keep or to maintain. I mean, at what point in that balance does nourishment become gluttony? Like, at what point do we overdo that just a little bit? We go from keeping to cultivating. We go from maintaining to working harder. At what point does provision in our lives, God providing for us what we need, at what point does provision turn into greed? It's a very fine balancing act, isn't it? Like, I need just enough to get through this, but also I want more than that. At what point does rest become sloth? At what point does love turn into lust? We want just a little bit more of it. We'll go just a little bit further with it, and we don't balance these two things. But he says to them to work and to keep it. But we always want to teeter just a little bit further for just a little bit more. Walter Brueggemann, in his book called Sabbath as Resistance, which is a great book, he said this balance is about withdrawal from the anxiety of the systems of Pharaoh, or basically slavery, working for something over and over again. It's the refusal to let one's life be defined by production and consumption and the endless pursuit of private well-being, just the well-being for me. And so God pulls Adam and he brings him into this work of keeping and cultivating, of maintaining and producing. He brings him into the work. You see it later on in the chapter in verse 19. It says that he is now naming the livestock. Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals, all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man, to Adam, to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. And I, for one, think Adam did a pretty good job. That's a lot of work to name all the animals, you know? He did a great job. I think it is a typical man thing to just be like, "What's that?" And you'd be like, "It's a platypus." You know? And you're just like, "Probably, right?" And they'd be like, "Why?" And you're like, "'Cause it's funny. It sounds funny. You know, it's kind of funny." And they'd be like, "Well, what's this little insect here?" And you just be like, "Fly." Why? Because it flies. It's real male logic here. Where like it either sounds funny or it's like it just is what it is. You know, we're not super intelligent people, and we just do what we see. And I think he did a great job. Those are hard to come up with. There's some really difficult names out there, and he had a hard job. Now, I will say, whoever names birds does need to watch themselves, because there are some dirty bird names out there. So just so you know, Jane has some books on them. I've had to go through and edit them. You know, they're not family friendly. Whoever's naming these birds out there, gross people. Probably Adam. When he was like a 13-year-old boy, he was like, "This will be hilarious," right? But yeah, this is what he's part of the creation story. Like, God involves him in this. He brings him into the job and says, "You now get to be creating alongside. You're part of this, but your job is not just to create. Your job is to maintain and cultivate. Your job is to do both things." And it says in this, which is interesting to me, because right after that it says, "But then for Adam, no suitable helper was found." He himself does not find someone suitable to be his partner in this journey. Now, this, of course, begs a great question, right? Because God has so far said everything was good that he created. But here he says it's not good for man to be alone. It's the first time God has said something's not good. And you have to ask yourself the question, did God screw up when he made men? And ladies, please don't answer. We don't need that right now. We don't need that negativity in our lives. He says it's not good. Well, why? Is it because of a quality issue? Not necessarily. It's actually a quantity issue. It's not good for man to be alone. He says he's going to be a suitable helper. Now, it's interesting here. This word suitable helper, I just want to break this down for just a second. If you've been around, you've probably heard me talk about this. I think this is very important for us to understand because we get this wrong all the time. Suitable helper sounds very much like Adam needed an admin assistant, doesn't it? It sounds like he needs just like somebody who's subservient, who can just, pick up the dirty work that he doesn't want to do that day or whatever, right? Somebody to go grab the dry cleaning, somebody who will take care of the dinner and the dishes and that stuff. That's what a suitable helper is. That is not what these words mean, just so you know. So the words in the Hebrew are two words, kenegdo, ezer. Kenegdo means matching or opposing. It's an opposite. In fact, it actually means to stand in opposition. Like if you were to have something that literally was standing against you, where you could push against it, the Hebrew word picture is it's almost like a column that you would push up against, and it would push with equal force against you. Yeah, you can try it right now if you'd like to with your significant other. Just push up against them, see how it feels. See if they push back. They probably will. That's what that feels like. It's having somebody who pushes against you the same way, at the same force, and with the same measure that you pushed against them. It's an opposite or a matching. Then the second word is ezer, which we hear as helper. Again, that to us sounds like an admin job. That is not exactly how the Hebrew would use it. This word is only used 20 times in the entire Old Testament, but 16 of those times it is used to talk about God himself. So unless you think the Israelites are referring to God as some kind of just admin assistant to the Israelites, then that's not what they're using it for either. They're saying that this is a helper who is doing more than what I can do alone, right? That's what this means. It's an opposite helper, an opposite aid, but somebody not less than, somebody who is equal to, and in fact at times does better than you do at certain things. Interesting, huh? And this opposing force is what God puts in place, saying this is what a relationship is going to look like. This is the first relationship in the Bible. And it starts off with a poem, right? Adam wakes up and says, "Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh." It's a poem. He sees this other person that's been made in the image of God, but is this opposite and equal force to him. And what he does when he sees this is he recognizes that there is this other person there who is going to both, he has to figure out how now to cultivate and to keep that relationship. Do you see, just as he was being formed and there were things being forced against one another with the clay and the water, and there was going to be this force of the breath of God holding them together, that's exactly what's happening relationally too. It's almost like God knew there's going to be relational friction in the world. There's going to be opposing forces that will work against each other that are just as strong as each other. But through this act of what God does, this breath and this spirit that he gives, there is a unity that can be found within it. It's almost like he's setting up an entire pattern of nature for us to figure out. And it's our job to figure out in these relationships, what do we cultivate and what do we keep? What do we produce and what do we maintain? What do we do more of and what do we do less of? And this is true in your relationships. I mean, this is a question you have to ask yourself at times, but at what point does my frustration that I might need to express turn into anger that is nothing but destructive? What do I need to keep and what do I need to cultivate? What do I need to maintain and what do I need to produce into the world? Right? At what point does your self-assuredness in a relationship start to turn into pride against the other person, where you assume you're better than them? These are good traits. There's a part of us that needs to cultivate them, but also a part of us that needs to keep it. At what point do my needs need to be expressed to the other person? And at what point are my needs making me a selfish person in this relationship? This isn't just about marriage. This is about every relationship that we experience. At what point do those things happen? And the reason those things happen, in my opinion, is because we have our relationship with God, we have a relationship with nature and creation, but it requires a trust in both of them. It requires a trust that there is going to be enough. That there's going to be enough. Whether it's enough self-assuredness, whether it's enough stuff that I'm going to have, whether it's provision in my life, whether it's rest in my life, whether it's work in my life, whatever it is, there's going to be enough. And then I don't have to take more than I need, but I can expect that there will always be enough. Because I don't want to, I'm just going to do, there's a spoiler here, and I'm going to, okay, we're going to get to it. And next week Billy's preaching. He'll talk more about this. And I had him do this because I think he knows it better than I do. There's going to be sin next week. And again, I think he knows more about it, so that's why I had him preaching on it. I barely understand it, but he has a lot of experience with it. And I hate to break this to you. I hate to be the one that tells you what's coming up, but it turns out there's going to be sin in the world, and that's going to happen. And that sin becomes because our relationship with God is broken and our relationship with creation is broken. Why? Because we don't trust. We don't trust that there is a God who is good and there is a God who is enough. We don't trust that his creation, these patterns he set up, are good for us. And so what we do is instead of keeping, we want to cultivate. Instead of maintaining, we want to work harder. And so what we do is, if you notice, there is this abundance in a garden that says there's everything you could ever want here. But what we say is we want just a little bit more. Let me just have the next little bit. Just give me that next thing and then I'll be happy. That'll satisfy me. But we don't trust that what God wants for us is only our deepest happiness. I use this quote all the time. It's honestly my favorite quote of all time. This is what it says. Sin is the unwillingness to trust that what God wants for me is only my deepest happiness. And we fall out of line with this because we want more. We don't want to just keep. We want to cultivate. We don't want to maintain. We want to create. We want to provide for ourselves. And so we go outside of the will of God because we think we know better and we want more. And so the question for all of us is, what do we need to keep and what do we cultivate? Because in these beautiful moments, there are these things that are coming together in our lives. There are going to be moments where things are in tension with each other. You may already have this tension with another person, another image bearer of God. You may be in tension with people right now that you disagree with. You might be in tension with people right now who don't look like you, people who don't think like you, with that coworker that drives you crazy, with that sibling you don't talk to, with that friend that you've burned bridges with. You might be in tension with them where these two things are not meeting anymore. But isn't that where the most beautiful things happen? What God's saying is it's your responsibility to cultivate and to keep. It's not just about where the sky meets the water. It's not just about where the mountains meet the land. It's not just about where the cliffs look over the waters. It's about two people even who may see the world differently coming together, connecto, as they're pushing against each other. But it's your responsibility to cultivate and to keep those relationships with God and with his creation, and to trust him that he'll be enough. So the question for you is, what in your life, who in your life, what is it that God has entrusted you to cultivate, to make more of? There might be things that you need to do more of. There might be things you need to create into this world and do more. There might be relationships that you need to cultivate right now. It might be with your children or your parents or your siblings or your spouse or whatever. There's a connecto, there's some kind of relationship you need to cultivate. And there might be some things that he's asking you just to keep, just to maintain. You don't need to force it. And you're trying to force certain things. It may be in your work habits. It may be in your livelihood. It may be in the job that you have. It may be in your family. It may be in your finances. You're forcing something that you just need to maintain and trust that God's going to be enough. The story of creation is not just a story about the world being formed. It's about the world that we still live in today. It's not a story that happened. It's a story that happens. And that we still live in a world where God has called us to be part of this and to be part of his world and cultivating and creating alongside him. So this morning as we close, we're going to stand and we're going to sing about this creation and that he would be magnified through it and through us as part of his creation. If you would, let's stand together. As we close, you're welcome to pray, you're welcome to journal, you're welcome to think about that question a little bit more if you'd like to as we close this morning. Let's pray together.